Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Let's Dev, where today we're continuing work on our Phasmophobia cross-minute mashup. The last time work was continued on implementing tools from Phasmophobia into a minute-like monochrome world. We focused on those tools and their interactivity with the ghost entity. The ghost entity also saw additions of a basic wandering system and proper navigation of the randomly generated levels. And today's plan will continue to focus on those elements as we attempt to refine them. We're going to start work on the evidence system, including the addition of ghost types. We'll then use those as reference to improve interactivity between tools and ghosts. And finally, we'll start toying with just how we want to go about communicating all that information to the player. Oh yeah, we're getting technical this episode, so let's get to the coding. First up was the long and arduous task of implementing the ghost types and their relative evidence. The ghost's type is determined on spawn, and the next frame the necessary evidence for that ghost is recorded. And using a switch, I went through the list of Phasmophobia ghosts taken from the wiki and stored on this good old notepad document. A function would add each piece of evidence to a DS list for future reference. And in order to make this as straightforward as possible, the quote-unquote evidence recorded share the same enum references as the tools list. Then to make things even more straightforward, I added enums for the ghost names. And finally, to test this all out, I drew this data to the screen. The results were looking good with the ghost choosing its type and corresponding evidence like we needed, though it was hard to tell what was what since everything was a number. So back in the global script, I added arrays containing actual printed names for both tools and ghosts, which I'm pretty sure we'll need at some point down the line anyway. After spending another huge chunk of time adding all this info, we finally had lists of information that were easy to read. Everything was working just as it should, so now it was time to make all this information worth something. I created a new function that would take a tool argument, iterate through the ghost list of evidence, and if said tool matched one of those entries, the output would return true. That tool check code was then used to determine whether the percentage code we wrote last time would run. In other words, if freezing temps, for example, is on the ghost's evidence list, then the thermometer will display a percentage to the left. Else, nothing happens. And testing showed this too worked well, albeit a little difficult to test consistently due to so many random factors. Regardless, things were going well, so I moved on. Up next, the same tool check was then applied to the tool objects players could drop. And for now, since we haven't figured out how tools will interact when not in the player's possession, I simply had the name of the tool pop up when the players are near enough. So yes, while this seemed like a pointless thing to do for now, we'll be back to add to it in due time. And while on the subject of design decisions, up next I added another switch to the tool distance check, limiting which tools would even display any percentages. Next, I drew a little progress bar sprite, broken up into 5 segments, each segment being filled per image index. Then in the draw code for the player, if the tool distance check has been activated, that bar is then drawn, and the image index would be determined based on the percentage data taken from the tool distance. And yes, having to convert that percentage into an index number took some mathing. Eventually I got it, and we now had a visual version of the percentage numbers displayed above the player's head, which again would only show up with the right tool and within tracking distance of a hotspot or the ghost itself. And for the sake of testing, I had all the current tools spawn near the player. This ended up taking way longer to put together than I thought it would. The good news is we have a base system for evidence that we can build on, and figuring out the percentage conversion is also going to save us a lot of time down the road. So while it may not seem like we got a whole lot done this session, we actually took care of some of the more important things needed under the hood. And now we're also finally making our way into having to get creative with the elements from both games. Like, I'm not even sure we'll stick with the percent bar above the player's head. In other words, I'm just excited to keep working on this one. But for now, that brings us to the end of this episode of Let's Dev. So leave a like if you enjoyed the episode, subscribe and turn on notifications if you haven't already, and leave your thoughts on our progress in the comments. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.